This episode of Stand Up and Holler is brought to you by Thrive Fantasy. Come prop up on Thrive Fantasy this football season. Thrive Fantasy is a daily fantasy sports and esports app for player props. With Thrive, you can eliminate the countless hours of research and focus on only the top tier athletes that have the biggest impact on the game. Choose 10 out of the 20 available player props to build your lineup. Each prop is assigned a fantasy value for both the over and the under based on how likely it is to hit. Hit the most props and rack up the most points to win a share of the prize pool. Use promo code REACT when you sign up today, and you'll receive a 100% instant first deposit match up to $100. Download Thrive Fantasy on the App Store or Play Store or by visiting their website, www.thrivefantasy.com. Sign up and prop today.
I'm Nick Knutson, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On tonight's episode, we'll cover those 2 minutes of pain before halftime, the AR-15 experience, KIRBY on recruiting. He made some comments in the postgame that were quite interesting. And we'll go with Will Miles' article, postgame assessment. Is Dan Mullen still holding the rope, or is he hanging by a thread for $1? Will, the Two Bits cheer, Mr. Two Bits, came about in times of struggle for the University of Florida football team. The thought was that the fans were too down on the team. Mr. Two Bits, he kept this cheer going through the stadium to provide a spark of optimism on that. So that's the history of this cheer. I reflect on that. In this moment when it's easy to feel very down about where we're at as a program. And I'm not saying we're here to pump some sunshine into the fan base right now, because I know that's not the time for that either. But I think that this episode is going to be a little interesting as we cover what was a very difficult day Saturday in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I mean, the loss to Georgia was embarrassing, right? I think everybody can agree that was an embarrassing performance, that you expected the team to probably not win, but you expected them to at least be competitive, and it didn't even look like they were remotely competitive, which is a problem, right? I mean, obviously, all of us want the program to be competitive. All of us want the program to be able to beat Georgia. But that's, we've been talking about this for a while now in terms of the ability to be competitive is relying on a few things, and the experiment was Mullen going to be able to pull those things together on a regular basis when he had sub-elite recruiting to associate with that. So, look, I mean, this is kind of what you expect, right? You expect a team that recruits at a high level to win a bunch of these games, and Georgia's doing that. And so, congratulations to the Bulldogs, as much as that pains me to say that. They won the game. Florida, you're going to have to get better. And there are brighter days ahead. I think there are definitely brighter days ahead. I think, we all kind of expected Florida to take a step back in 2021. I don't think we expected to be quite this far. But, the quarterback play has been spotty. Even when Richardson was brought into this one, the quarterback play was spotty. And so, when you get spotty quarterback play, you're going to be inconsistent. When you're inconsistent, you're going to lose. And right now, Florida's an average team. Now, it's a heck of a lot better team than it was under McElwain in 2017 and under Muschamp in 2013 and 2014. I do think we need to remember that. At the same time, being better than McElwain and Muschamp is not the goal. And so it's one of those glass half empty, glass half full type things, right? Where you look at it and say, there are better days ahead. We know there are better days coming ahead. The question is, are those better days capped out at a certain ceiling that just isn't going to be acceptable for the program? I think that's what everybody's wrestling with right now. The depression doesn't come necessarily from losing to Georgia. It comes from realizing that ceiling is quite a ways off.
Rock bottom would be too severe of a term right now. When McElwain got fired a couple of years ago, that felt more like rock bottom than this does. But in this case, when you look around and you see Georgia maybe potentially on the way to a national championship, it makes it tough. However, I think this is more of a moment where there needs to be some humility within the program to take a serious look at itself and say, what are we doing right and what are we doing wrong? Not everything's terrible, right? We're doing some things okay. Some things are at a high level, but not across the board. And that's what got exposed yesterday in Jacksonville. And we're going to start off, speaking of a period of time that was exposed, we'll start off with 2 minutes of pain in 2 bits. Will, it started as a positive, all right? The first half, it wasn't very pretty. It was 0-0 after the first quarter. We saw Georgia was really the one hurting themselves early on between a couple penalties and a missed field goal. Georgia was just shooting itself in the foot time and time again. Stetson Bennett throws a pretty terrible interception, but to Rashad Torrance, who caught it outside of the end zone, coasted it into the end zone, and then realized it as he was in the end zone, bolts back out to at least get to the 2-yard line. The sequence of plays that followed weren't great. Anthony Richardson ends up getting stripped while he's being carried seemingly by the entire it was a very weird scrum, but his forward momentum was continuing forward. And Nolan Smith comes in, forces a fumble with 2:22 left. Let's start with that first play, Will. Nolan Smith, by the way, he's a 5-star player, Will. Let's start with that play.
So I actually want to back up a little bit. If you look at it, Georgia had an 8-play drive where they missed a field goal, then a 7-play drive where they had to punt, a 3-play drive, so a nice 3 and out, and then an 11-play drive for a field goal. So the defense already getting tired. Florida has an 11-play drive for 41 yards, that 4th and 13 that Mullen goes for. And so Florida's down 3-0 after having missed a field goal. But really, when you think about it, Georgia had pretty much dominated the first quarter, even though they're only up 3-0. You get that interception from Bennett after a huge play to Darnell Washington. One of those things, and in my preview, I actually highlighted the throws to the tight ends against the linebackers being a problem. Jeremiah Moon got caught up in traffic and Washington ran for a long way. So you were sort of on the ropes, and all of a sudden Rashard Torrance took you away from those ropes, right? Obviously comes out of the end zone. I think there's some debate about whether he could have stayed in there and needed to get out. That's a split-second decision. I don't think you can blame him for that. The officials kind of give an awful spot. And then this, I think, is the one thing that you pretty much knew, that whenever Florida wanted a yard or two, that Anthony Richardson was going to run the ball, or Emory Jones was going to run the ball later in the game. And I think that predictability is something that's really difficult to have against a team like Georgia. But that's a fluke play. I mean, the play that Richardson fumbles, that's a fluke play. He gets carried basically by 4 or 5 Georgia defenders. As he's coming down, one pulls the ball out. In fact, Florida did it to Georgia later on in the game on the first drive of the second half, and the ball came out. I don't know that I like that rule, but, at the end of the day, they've allowed you to push guys forward in the pile, and so you have to hold on to it. Richardson doesn't. And the bigger thing is that on the very next play, Georgia turns around, runs it in for a touchdown. So it didn't take Georgia any time. It wasn't like it was one of those 7-play goal line stands where they scored and were able to put it away in the last 2 minutes. It took 5 seconds for them to turn around and score. And so there's still 2 minutes left, or 2.5 minutes left, whatever it is. And Florida's getting the ball back, but now Georgia's up 10-0.
Well, and you nailed it there. James Cook, 11-yard run, first play. So not even a pretense that the defense is going to step up and help out in a difficult spot. The defense just rolls right over, allows an 11-yard run for a touchdown on the first play. Next drive, Richardson, tip pass, interception by Nolan Smith. Once again, same player end up stripping the ball there. First play of the following drive on offense, 36-yard touchdown pass to Kyrus Jackson. Really great catch along the sideline. Was fairly open. Good throw by Bennett. Once again, the defense, hey, defense, we need you to come up in the tough spot. No thanks. No thanks, they say. So tip pass, Will, you didn't come into this game with Richardson. If Richardson was going to get the start, which we were hoping he would, with the idea that Richardson was going to play a totally clean game, that was probably not going to be the case. These mistakes were likely going to happen. Just to see them happen all together, though, that was the really difficult part.
Yeah, I mean, I'm completely okay with this interception. So this was a zone blitz by Georgia. Georgia's defensive lineman drops back, and they blitzed Dean coming from the linebacker position, and Richardson threw the ball where the blitzing linebacker had vacated. And in fact, he'd gotten chewed out on the sidelines earlier when Georgia had blitzed from the edge, and he had sort of drifted away from the blitz and thrown away from the blitz rather than throwing towards it. And Gary Danielson had pointed out during the broadcast that what you need to do is throw into the blitz. So he was trying to do that, right? That was something he had been coached to do on the sidelines that had been pointed out earlier in the game. And he's throwing where that blitzing linebacker comes from. The problem is that he didn't account for the defensive lineman who was dropping back. It wasn't a blitz. It was a zone blitz. The defensive lineman dropped back into that lane. dives and tips the pass. But this, again, Florida has been really unlucky this year on a lot of these interceptions. I think I wrote last week that, Kyle Trask had something like 7% of his passes were interceptable, and only like 1.5% were actually intercepted. And if you look at Emory Jones and Anthony Richardson coming into this game, it was like 9% of their passes were interceptable, but it was something like 5.5% of their throws of those passes were being intercepted. And so that's one where most of the time that gets tipped and falls harmlessly to the ground. In this case, it just gets tipped and goes right to the Georgia defensive back who picks it up. And, a huge turnover, obviously, but still 36 yards from the end zone. And that, I think, is, the funny thing is you look back on this, Georgia had 3 turnovers too. Right. So it's not Georgia didn't win the turnover battle. What happened was Georgia won what happened right after the turnover decisively. And that's sort of what happened in these 2 minutes.
Yeah, stat sheet across the board is remarkably similar for a game that was completely one-sided on the field. Following possession, we'll put the final nail in the coffin, really. 50-yard pick six from Nakobe Dean, another 5-star prospect, by the way. He scores with 7 seconds remaining in the half to put Georgia up, to give them that solid 24-0 lead before halftime.
Yeah, this one's on Richardson. This one's his fault. Though the interesting thing is I've seen Kyle Trask throw this during the spring game. So this exact play, this exact jump from either the safety or the linebacker who's out there on that particular player. I think it was John Huggins a few years ago in the spring game, jumped a pass that Kyle Trask threw out into the flat. Very similar play call, similar look. Huggins takes it the other way in the spring game. Trask learns his lesson, right? Well, Anthony Richardson learned a lesson on this one, and he learned that those Georgia linebackers are fast, and he also learned that you can't zone in and just sort of, stare down the receiver when you're going to throw deep when you're going to throw late to the outside, and it gets taken the other way. But again, I look back and I say the fumble was the killer, and then the second interception where they couldn't keep him from getting a field goal just sealed it, because at 17-0, this game was over. Based on the way Georgia's defense was playing and what Florida's offense was able to do, the game was over at 17-0. The pick six just like drilled the point home. But, at that point, it was just sort of icing on the cake. It was the Rocky thing where it's like, throw the damn towel. Like, that's where we are at that point. It was hurtful. It sucked. You really wish that Florida could have made it down, maybe put a field goal up 17-3 going to halftime. Maybe you feel a little bit good about yourself, but end of the day wasn't to be. And Anthony Richardson learned some lessons there the hard way.
Unfortunately so. And all together within a span, that fumble happens with 2:22. And the pick six is run into the end zone with 7 seconds left. So literally a 2-minute span there. But for the crowd that wants to say, hey, outside that 2-minute span, we played them pretty tough. Let's address that, Will. Let's address that. Okay, sure. But it doesn't matter. It's a 2-minute stretch of the game in which you were completely and utterly dominated. And that was the entire difference in the game, if you want to look at it that way.
Well, I think you texted me afterwards going, yeah, the captain of the Titanic did a great job, except for that iceberg.
That's it.
That's exactly
what the food was like. Good. The music was great. Just that one iceberg.
Iceberg. If they'd had enough lifeboats, it would have been all right. But, I think at the end of the day, that second half gets played very differently if it's 3-0 or 10-0 than if it's 24-0. Mm-hmm. And so that second half was basically Georgia going, let's get out of here without getting anybody hurt and see if we can get a shutout. It was not, let's pin our ears back and make Florida uncomfortable. And once Anthony Richardson went out, Emory Jones played pretty decently, but I think a lot of that was because of the way Georgia was playing on defense and what they were trying to do, as opposed to, again, I don't think you take anything away from Emory Jones. At the same time, let's be honest, the focus and the guys that were rotating in for Georgia were different in the second half than they were in the first half. Look, moral victories suck. I don't want moral victories. A 2-point loss to Alabama is a loss. A 28-point loss, or 27-point loss to Georgia is a loss. The only thing this tells you is that you're further away than you thought you were after that loss to Alabama, and that, maybe Alabama sort of took their foot off the gas in the second half, and Georgia didn't take its foot off the gas at any point in this one. And that's maybe the difference between those two teams. It's one of the reasons why I think people think Georgia has a real opportunity to win the SEC and the national championship this year. Now, Georgia's a really good team. I think Georgia might even be an elite team. Georgia is a championship contender, might end up at the end of the year. We look at them and go, nobody beat them. And that may be the case. The difference is that with most of the national championship teams we've seen that have been buzzsaws recently, Alabama last year, LSU in 2019, those teams have been teams that can put up 50 at any time. And then you sort of wondered about their defense. With this team, it's the opposite, right? Like if Florida had played a clean offensive game, Stetson Bennett didn't play that great. And so there was an opportunity if there was a clean game played by the Florida offense to be competitive, but obviously, they didn't play a clean game and that's the end of it. There are no moral victories, right? You are 4-4 and there's a lot to be said about the underlying statistics and Florida's quality. And, Florida hasn't lost the yardage battle in a game yet and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, nobody cares. Nobody's gonna give you a trophy for going 4-4, but winning the yardage battle. And moral victories, I mean, you can take something from the 2-point loss to Alabama if you win the rest of your games, but a 2-point loss to Alabama means nothing when you go 4-4. So, I think the team will probably go 8-4 this year. That the 4 games coming up are easier, but that's sort of we got people on the lifeboats and they haven't frozen yet. But at the end of the day, that's definitely not what you thought you were going to get at the beginning of the year, and not pointing in the right direction in terms of the North Star.
I just wanted to make that point because I don't want this game to be once it marinates and we get over how terrible this past Saturday was. Once we get over it and we think back on it, I don't want there to be any type of discussion at outside of that one stretch, if we don't make those mistakes, this was a beatdown. We got crushed. It wasn't close. And you know what? There's a little bit of disrespect toward this Georgia team. I'm guilty of it too, Will. Like you're waiting for Georgia to choke, like they always do, right? But I'm telling you, this Georgia team, they look like to me like those early Saban era Bama teams where you roll out with a quarterback that's not going to play on Sundays, but the rest of the team sure as well is. And so to that extent, they look like you can get them. And maybe if they have a Johnny Manziel type of performance against them, like a heroic type of performance against them, they can be taken down. But I'll tell you what, it's going to need a top to bottom great performance. That SEC title game against Bama will probably be the best shot at taking out Georgia because I watch Ohio State on Saturday night. Ohio State, they've looked pretty good the last month against weaker competition. They did not follow through against a Penn State team that really struggled with Illinois last week. So I'm telling you, I don't see where the competition for Georgia is nationally outside of Bama in the SEC title game. And hey, I just want to make sure that we fully understand that we are miles away from where they're at right this second. And so I'm not trying to rub salt in the wound, but I don't want that to be, on the bright side outside of this. No, we got to be real with ourselves, because if we're not real with ourselves, we're not going to address the changes. We're not going to make the changes that are necessary. And that's where we're at right now as a program. I talked about the humility. We need to humble ourselves. We need to really look at what's not working. Last year, a lot of things did go well. Even though we had a frustrating finish to the season, most of the season went pretty well last year outside of the end. And you could look at some of those things and be like, yeah, but Mullen took care of Georgia and he did this and that. And yeah, maybe Grantham can bounce back. And no, we can't have that type of talk going into next season. We need to make some clear and definitive changes if this program's going to reach championship level under the Dan Mullen regime. So that's the only reason why I want to make those comments.
No, I think absolutely. I'm glad you're finally coming over to my side on some of these things, because earlier in the year, if you look at the offseason, I texted you about this earlier today, but you go back to some of those earlier things where I was like, what happens if we lose to Georgia and LSU and Alabama and these 2-8 against those teams?
I didn't think we'd go 0-3 in that stretch. I thought that was disaster scenario thinking.
You also didn't think we were going to lose to Kentucky, and then you also didn't think that it was going to be this bad against Georgia.
Didn't think we'd let down against LSU again. Didn't think that either.
Well, here's the reality, man. So Bill Sykes wrote a really good article for Read Reaction maybe a year and a half ago, where he looked at historical SEC champions, and it takes somewhere between 6 and 9 all SEC players in order to win an SEC championship. And most of the time you win an SEC championship, you're competing for a national championship. In fact, all the time, right? Mm-hmm. So 6 to 8. How many all SEC guys are on this roster? I think 1. Right? I mean, it's Kyrie Elam, right? That's it. I mean, who else is an all SEC player, first or second team from this team right now? Yeah. I'm struggling.
No one definitive. No one that you couldn't argue.
I mean, there are guys that you look at and say they could be all SEC if they got the ball all the time, right? Like a guy like Dameon Pierce or even a guy like Malik Davis, maybe if they got him the ball all the time, might have an opportunity to do that. A guy like Jacob Copeland maybe has the ability.
Copeland's got the talent.
But, you know, I mean, Copeland had 2 catches for 27 yards. Maybe Rashad Torrance. I mean, he's got an awful lot of tackles, but I don't know that he's been a difference maker. Zach Carter, yeah, he has 6 sacks, but he's sort of tailed off here in the last 3 or 4 games. I'm just going through the roster saying, all right, who's going to make – I think maybe Jason Marshall makes freshman all SEC. But other than that, you got 1. So you need 6 or 7 more guys, and that's really the issue. I mean, the issue is when you look over at Georgia, I think Stetson Bennett's going to make all SEC. I think Zamir White's going to make all SEC. I think Bowers is going to make all SEC.
That defensive front in general.
McConkey's going to make all SEC most likely. Nolan Smith's going to make all SEC. Quay Walker might.
Jordan Davis.
N'Kobe Dean's going to. Jordan Davis is going to. Trayvon Walker is going to. So, you know, you start just going down. You're like, okay. Like the reality is that the all SEC talent that's necessary to win is over there on that Georgia side. Yeah. And whether you want to talk about recruiting or whether you want to talk about development, doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, we know what we're seeing. And when you look at the difference makers on the teams, there's one guy on Florida's team that I would qualify as a difference maker. And he's a guy you can completely ignore if you just don't throw it in his direction. And so, you know, that to me is the thing is there's just a wide chasm between the number of guys who are competing and can be real difference makers on each squad. And that's going to need to change. The 5 stars who've been brought in over the last couple of years. So the transfers who were brought in initially, you know, the Trevon Grimeses and the Van Jeffersons and the Jonathan Grenards all turned into stars.
Immediately,
right?
Too.
Immediately.
Wait. Yeah.
And Justin Shorter, DeMarcus Bowman, Lorenzo Lingard, all those guys have not, at least not as of yet. And so, you know, that's one of the big issues is that those 5-star guys they brought in have not been able to be those 5-star hits. And that's the problem is 5 stars are great, but they only turn into NFL guys like 65% of the time. And so if you're going to bring them in via transfer, and if you're only going to bring in a couple through high school recruiting, you have to hit on all of them. And they just haven't this year. And that's one of the reasons why it feels like they're so much further behind.
It's tough, man. Tough point for this program right now. But the difference, just so that people don't think we're too down on things, I want to be real clear. This isn't the McElwain era where you're walking in saying, man, we're at 100 miles. Like we are a good distance away, but there are some talented players on this roster. I do believe that we can fix this thing, but there needs to be serious changes in the program going forward. Otherwise, we're going to get that one-off win once in a while. We'll talk more about that going on. Let's jump into 4 bits, Will, and talk about the AR-15 experience. Like we said, Saturday, full-on systematic failure across the board. Hard to blame Anthony Richardson on this. Did he play a role in that failure? Yes, of course he did. You can't make those type of errors in a critical situation down your own end, fumble, the tip pick, the pick six. We talked about it. Those were the flashpoints, but we saw signs of his inexperience throughout. There was that play. You highlighted it in your article on Read and Reaction. Check out Will's post-game article on Read and Reaction, where as he was rolling left, Georgia runs a stunt, and he takes a big sack that ended up, I believe that was the drive that set up the 4th and 13 where Jalen Carter sacked him, Will, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so that sets up the eventual 4th and 13, but really that was a killer play right there. And it's not that I'm not faulting Richardson for, being under pressure. That's obviously on the offensive line, but the pressure was coming from his right. And he rolled left because I think he saw it a little bit, but wait, you could get rid of the ball. That's an option. You didn't have to eat the ball. I know Carter was up on him quick. And by the way, Carter, he was highlighted by Brent Rollins on our Georgia preview on the Read and Reaction podcast. That man moving that size, that moves that fast at that size, that's some NFL stuff right there. But there was also a play I noticed too where the ball was snapped, where Richardson was looking over at the sideline. That's inexperience right there, that type of stuff. It's hard to get settled in and play with real confidence when you're dealing with the type of pressure he saw from the UGA front. Florida's offensive line, they struggled mightily, and Richardson dealt with constant pressure while stepping into throws all day. Also, there was a play on that 4th and 13 play they went on. They really panned out wide on the replay, and they showed the field. There's not a single receiver open. There's not a single receiver open. Our receivers aren't getting open. The O-line's getting beat up. What do you want Richardson to do? You can argue about maybe Mullen didn't scheme it correctly, but again, when you don't recruit, that's what you rely on. You rely on Mullen to out scheme, and he did not out scheme. There was no out scheming, and that was my biggest hope coming into this game. Anthony Richardson touches the ball 50 times between passes and runs and just has a day. Georgia hasn't seen. I said last week, Georgia hasn't seen an offense as good as this one, right? Man, it didn't look like it on Saturday. Georgia had their way with that offense. We did not out scheme them. And Anthony Richardson, this is why you maybe I'll get into this topic specifically later, but Mullen, he's waited and not put Richardson in. This is the time where we pull the trigger and finally give him his first start. Georgia, that's a great way to build up a guy's confidence, man. There's plenty of opportunities to do this. We could have done this before. Really should have happened after the Kentucky game, in my opinion, at the latest. Should have happened earlier, probably, but at the latest, he should have got Vandy. He should have got LSU to get ready for this game. And you saw that inexperience show up on a day where the offensive line was getting beat and the receivers weren't getting open, Will.
Yeah, so I don't want to absolve Anthony Richardson of all fault here. He played really bad. And, we can talk about zone blitz, hazy young quarterback, but hey, if you're going to be in there, you got to see that, right?
Starter's a starter.
You can't throw into that. You can't throw that pick six at the end of the half. You just can't. That's a ball you can't throw. You have to hold on to the ball when you're down in your own end zone. One of the things you need to know is you got to cover it up, right? And that can happen, and that you either need to go down or you got to cover it up. All of those things need to be true. But Mullen came onto the post-game press conference afterwards and confirmed what we had been hearing all week long, which was that he and Emory Jones had shared the snaps 50-50 in practice. So not only did you throw the guy in for his first start against the best defense in the country, and maybe one of the best defenses we've seen in a really long time, with limited reps before in games, but you didn't give him the full reps for the week. And so, or for the 2 weeks. And so if you're going to make him the starter, you're going to make that decision, then I think you got to give him the full 100% reps to fully support him. And if you're not going to fully support him, if you're going to have half measures, if you're going to hedge, then he should have started Emory Jones. And I know there's a lot of noise around the program. I know you and I are making noise around the program saying that we think Anthony Richardson needs to start. But Mullen gets paid an awful lot of money to make sure that he's got the right guys in there and to make sure that he has made sure that his guys are ready. And it was pretty clear that Anthony Richardson either wasn't ready or got rattled after the first turnover. And then, that turned into subsequent turnovers that turned the game. All that being said, it's not as though I think Emory Jones wins this game. In fact, the exact zone blitz that fooled Anthony Richardson early in the game fooled Emory Jones in the second half. He threw it right in the defender's hands, and the guy just happened to drop it. So the idea that the outcome was going to be a whole lot different, I think is foolhardy. I think it would have been the same outcome regardless of who they had at quarterback. And I think having Anthony Richardson out there and getting this experience is a good thing. I think sometimes, we look at failure as a bad thing sometimes, but I think one of the things that you learn, I work in research and development. So I literally, when people come and work for me, I say, you're going to cost me money. Don't do it twice, right? Like, don't make the same mistake twice. And so that's all I'm asking from Anthony Richardson. I have no problem with the turnovers in this game because he's a young guy and you expect that. You expect he's going to make mistakes. Now you expect some explosives on the other side. He wasn't really able to provide that. But what you do expect is that you won't see the same mistakes. So now we've got some games coming up. Hopefully he gets a lot of reps in those games. And we won't see these same mistakes again. We'll see him avoid these sorts of mistakes in the future. And if he does that, I think we can be really encouraged because what we have seen with Emory Jones is the same repeatedly, right? That the ball coming out late, really the same. Emory Jones basically threw this interception against USF. The one that got returned for a touchdown, he made that throw against USF and that pick got taken back. And I don't think it got taken back for a touchdown. I think they actually tackled the guy before he brought it all the way back. But the exact same throw, the exact same read, the exact same thing. The corner jumped it in that case and took it back the other direction. So I don't know that this is something that we should necessarily not expect. I think that's what you expect with a young quarterback who's in there. And I think that sort of goes to your point, right? Which is that if he's gotten at least half a game against Vanderbilt, if he was splitting the reps when they were coming into Vanderbilt, when they were coming into LSU, and then the reps switch and all of a sudden now it's 90% or 70% or whatever you expect or whatever makes sense before the Georgia game, then yeah, that helps things out. But hey, it is what it is, right? It's a learning experience for Anthony Richardson. I don't think that you can say there's no sugarcoating. He didn't play well. At the same time, people who are like, see, that's what you were asking for. It's like, yeah, we want him to get experience because we've seen what Emory Jones can do, and what Emory Jones can do can't offset the other limitations, because let's be honest, we couldn't make a 20-yard field goal. Our special teams did nothing. The defense couldn't get stops when there were turnovers for the second straight game.
Systematic failure, Will. It wouldn't have been on Emory Jones if Emory played. I wouldn't be blaming Emory Jones on the loss either.
Nah, I mean, so now all that being said, I think if you asked me who shares a large burden of the loss, Anthony Richardson shares a big burden of that loss, right? The 3 turnovers are his, and he has to own those. At the same time, I think it's understandable and it's discouraging, but I think that can be turned around if we see learning over the next few games. And so I'm not discouraged. I think it's actually maybe even something that will help him moving forward. And I've said this a few times during the season, or maybe during the off season, anybody who changes his number to 15 at the University of Florida ain't going to have a confidence problem. So I don't think Anthony Richardson is going to come out of this like gun shy and not want to fire it down the field. If anything, he's going to come out against, South Carolina and Samford and Florida State and go, these guys are slow. Like, these guys are nothing like Georgia, and he's going to go out and light them up. And so, that's what I'm looking forward to the rest of the year. I think Richardson's going to be fine. I think they threw him to the wolves a little bit in this one. I think we saw that. But the problem isn't that Richardson wasn't ready. The problem is neither of them are ready. And that's sort of been the issue the entire year, right? It's not as though Jones has not been turning the ball over and has just been a game manager and everybody's clamoring for Anthony Richardson. Like, Jones has been turning the ball over 2 times a game as it is. And so Richardson had his turn. He had the turnovers as well. But, you mentioned the sack earlier. The fact that he held on to that is actually an area of growth, because he chucked those up the game against LSU. He chucked those up in earlier games as well. When he was under pressure, he just threw it up and left the opponent intercepted. And this one, he takes the sack as he gets more and more familiar with the offense, more and more comfortable back there. That's when he's just going to flick into the stands.
Throw it away.
But it's a progression, right? And you can't expect a guy to come in and just be lights out every time. I think we expected more than we got, but this is what it is. That's the baseline, and let's learn from it and move on.
I did not expect Anthony Richardson to look so completely human on Saturday. We've yet to see that out of him. So that certainly did not hit expectations at all. You're right. I mean, no excuse. He made his mistakes out there, but I did expect at least a couple big mistakes from a guy who's starting his first game. I did. Maybe should have been not splitting reps. Hadn't heard that till you said that, but that's an interesting way to approach it. But that goes into Mullen's management again. So I think it's a full-on top to bottom systematic failure in this one. And I don't think Emory Jones is offering you anything on Saturday that Anthony Richardson didn't, if that makes sense.
My thing is I expected Anthony Richardson to turn the ball over a couple times. I expected Anthony Richardson to offset it with a couple of big plays. And he wasn't able to offset it with a couple of big plays. Quite honestly, they didn't go downfield or didn't have time to go downfield. Again, on that ball that he was sacked, I think they were taking a shot, and he didn't have an opportunity to go downfield. Held it a little bit too long. And against LSU, you can do that. Against Georgia, you can't.
But you thought at the very least he'd run it effectively, though.
I'll tell you, the one that he should have run it was that weird 2nd and 20 call where they did the double pass. He had an opportunity to get a running start, and he might have been able to juke a linebacker and get a first down there if he'd have just run it. The fact that he threw it into double coverage, I think, is an indication of sort of he was rattled, right? I think you can see a little bit of desperation. I think you can see he was rattled as they got down further and further and further. He started to think, I need to force it a little bit. And then all of a sudden forcing it became what turned into those turnovers. And he's going to learn from that. And I think, we saw this with Emory Jones in a few different games where he'd throw an interception and that would sort of cascade into more and more mistakes, and really maybe even more and more conservatism, right? Trying to avoid the mistakes. He was trying to be more conservative. Now, Anthony Richardson didn't show that. He didn't get more conservative, but maybe he needed to get a little bit more conservative once he had the first or second mistake there. So again, learning experiences. I think, people who say, "Oh, he shouldn't have started him," I think that's that's revisionist history based on what you saw. I don't think you can retcon that considering what we know about Emory Jones. Again, I think Emory Jones is an okay quarterback. I think he's played decent at times this year, but I think he would have been overwhelmed by this defense as well. And, the idea to look at what he did in the second half and say, I don't buy that. I think Georgia was doing very different things in the second half than they were in the first half that let Florida get a few more yards, but the game was well in hand by then.
Any word on the Richardson injury?
No, but it actually, on that sack, it looked like he got a little bit dinged too. And I do wonder whether he sort of, got a little bit like he wasn't the same after that. I felt like he played much better before that particular play. And then after that was when all the wheels fell off. But I haven't heard anything about the injury. Hopefully he's okay. That's obviously a big part of it, right? If it was a concussion that kept him out, then, he's going to have to go through the protocol. And obviously if it takes holding him out a week or two to make sure he's fully healthy, I think they should absolutely do that. You don't want to risk anybody's long-term health by rushing him out there, even if it means they get another week of experience.
All right, let's move to 6 bits. Kirby Smart made some interesting comments in the postgame on recruiting specifically. He said, if you don't recruit, there's no coach out there that can outcoach recruiting. I don't care who you are. The best coach in the game better be a good recruiter because no coaching is going to outcoach players. He also said, anybody will tell you our defense is good because we have good players. 25% evaluation, 50% recruiting, 25% coaching. But if you don't recruit, you have no chance. Look at the best teams out there. They got good football players, and that's the reason I believe in recruiting, and I believe you better be always recruiting because if you're not, somebody else is. Will, we've discussed recruiting extensively on this show. I'll call it your pet peeve, which you share with the segment of the fan base here with the Florida program under Mullen, that they're not recruiting to the level at which Florida is capable. That's been a common criticism for the last really couple of years here. And you look at it, Bama built a dynasty on elite recruiting. Urban Meyer did it at Florida, but he really changed the dynamic of an entire conference in the Big Ten when he went up there recruiting. The whole recruiting landscape changed when he took the Ohio State job in the Big Ten. The trends continued under Ryan Day, who's done a superb job recruiting there. And the Buckeyes they're on their first ever stretch of 5 straight outright Big Ten titles if they win this year. Georgia may only have, we joke around that they mostly have recruiting titles to its name, but this is the 4th time in 6 years Kirby Smart is taking the Dogs to Atlanta as the champions of the East. And winning the SEC, which Georgia did do under Smart in 2017, has eluded Florida for 13 consecutive seasons now. So it hasn't been since 2008. If Dan Mullen struggles to recruit at an elite level on his own, he needs to assemble a staff that can make up for the deficits to his approach. I'm not exactly sure what that is at the moment, Will. I'm not totally sure what specifically is the exact cause on that, but we need to pinpoint that and figure that out. Florida should be among the elite in recruiting across college football. If we continue to accept the status quo here, we'll continue being the Penn State of the SEC. You looked at that Penn State team. I mentioned them earlier. They played significantly better against Ohio State than they did against Illinois when they lost. But Ohio State, I would say if you watch that Ohio State-Penn State game on Saturday, Ohio State was sloppy. Maybe they played their C game. A lot of mistakes. It was a really pretty ugly game by Ohio State. And Penn State, they're talented enough to not be a pushover. And if all conditions are right, they can step up and win that type of game. But Ohio State basically plays their C game and wins by 9. So Penn State at their ceiling right now is who we are. We can, on our best years, we can be on the edge of the conversation of a 4-team playoff. Some of you out there might say, well, hey, we're about to expand the playoff. And if we do, that's great. But are we simply okay just making the field and then getting crushed by actual contenders once we're in there? I just think this iteration of Mullen's program, it'll have us competitive in most games. But if we have an off day against an inferior opponent, that's a loss. If we don't show up with our best game and the conditions aren't right, the wind's not going the right way, the weather's not the perfect, like everything's right to beat a team like Alabama or Georgia, it's not going to happen, man. So that's where things are right now under Mullen with the lack of elite recruiting so far.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm, you mentioned recruiting being my pet peeve. Like, it goes both ways. One, I'm frustrated that people just talk about, well, let's trust it, right? And let's trust that Mullen's gonna be able to get it done, that he's a better evaluator, those sorts of things. I don't necessarily think that that's a good way to go, but hey, it's an experiment. Let's see, right? That's been it's one of the reasons why I want Mullen to have next year, regardless, because I think it's his best shot to show that this kind of thing can work. But the other thing is that I am amused when Florida loses and all of a sudden everybody starts shouting about recruiting. Florida didn't lose that game yesterday because of recruiting. I mean, they did in some cases, but and I think you could say against Georgia they lost it, but they didn't lose the game against LSU because of inferior recruiting. They didn't lose the game against Kentucky because of inferior recruiting. You could make a case they lost the game to Alabama because of inferior recruiting, just because, sort of the blitz in the first quarter was something that they hadn't seen that kind of speed yet, and so that was able to sort of overtake them. So 2 of their 4 losses this year, I think you might be able to blame on inferior talent. 2 of the 4, I think, are because, quite honestly, Florida's been outcoached. I mean, you look at that LSU game, they didn't get the team up ready to play. They didn't have the right quarterback in the game. By the time they did get the right quarterback in the game, they were behind. When they turned the ball over early, LSU was able to convert it into touchdowns rather than holding them to field goals. Defense couldn't stop a counter, right? I mean, that has nothing to do with the talent. That has everything to do with the coaches. But all that being said, talent matters. And the reason it matters is something I actually had in my article this week, which is that Georgia had a down year last year. They went 8-2, and they had pretty bad quarterback play. Stetson Bennett wasn't great. And then once they brought in DeJuan Mathis, it was just bad. And they were sort of waiting for JT Daniels the entire year, and he wasn't really healthy from his knee injury until the last 4 games. And up until that point, Georgia was just not, I mean, they were an okay team. They weren't great, but they were able to beat the teams they should beat, because even with bad quarterback play, the talent they had around them could sustain them when they had bad quarterback play or when somebody threw a bunch of interceptions, except in games when they played teams that had good quarterbacks. So, they lost to a team like Florida because Kyle Trask was able to light them up. Florida's in the same spot right now where they're not getting elite quarterback play, or at least they're getting very inconsistent quarterback play, but there's not that level of talent to back them up when they get that inconsistent level of quarterback play, which is why you lose the game to LSU and why you lose the game to Kentucky. So again, I'm sort of talking out of both sides of my mouth where I'm saying, hey, it's not a talent deficit that's stopping you from winning those games against Kentucky and LSU, but at the same time, you wouldn't lose those games if you were a more talented team. So, yeah, I mean, it needs to get better. I've written multiple articles about what I think they could do, right? I have my whole 5-3 theory where I'm like, you just focus all your resources on five-star prospects, and then you bring in a bunch of 3 stars. And the reason you do that is that the 5 stars are the ones who turn out 60-70% of the time to be NFL guys. And then the 4 stars and the 3 stars, really, there's not a huge difference between the number who turn out. And so who cares? Don't spend your resources getting those guys. Talked about building sort of a moat around Florida. You can't let the top wide receivers in the state leave. So you need to focus on those places. They spent a lot of time on Chris Steele out in California very early on. That was clearly a mistake. Especially considering that he went back. But even getting him, I think, had an opportunity cost at not being able to establish things in the state of Florida. I think high school coaches in the state of Florida, you don't hear a lot of them glowing about Dan Mullen and his staff. That's an issue, right? I mean, they need to have somebody on there who's like the best friend of the high school coaches in the area. And then the final part is that, at the end of the day, you got to think it's important, which means you have to put in a process and a system to make sure that you're getting back and contacting and always on the radar of these guys. And one of the things that you hear repeatedly is that things tend to be a little bit disorganized when it comes to the way Florida recruits and the way they communicate with the different recruits. And so that's something that they can improve as well. Now, some of that is resources. You look at the spending, and Georgia way outspends Florida. Now I know some people, right, will clap back and say, well, Georgia doesn't have a private plane and that inflates their numbers and all sorts of stuff. I don't care. At the end of the day, if it's a couple $1 million that you need to pour into it to make it better, that's something the UAA should be able to do right now. In fact, it would be cheaper than replacing Dan Mullen and paying his buyout. And so, spend that money. The other thing is that there's a lot of administrative staff and a lot of on-field coach staff that if you look at the Alabama program, there is a ton of front office personnel who help with those sorts of things. And that's something that Florida could obviously use as well. So yes, they're building facilities. Yes, they're building things up, but let's be honest, they were behind. And so you can't just try to equal what these other programs are doing, you're going to have to pour resources in to try to get ahead of them, especially when, that Urban Meyer's book with Buddy Martin a few years ago talks about having to keep Tebow away from Dan Mullen when they were trying to recruit him. And that says something about his personality. Now, the funny thing is now Tebow loves him, right? So Tebow is a Mullen acolyte after having gotten to know him. So it's not that Mullen's a bad guy. It's just that he's not a salesman. And I think we've seen that at all the press conferences, right? Like if he was a salesman, then we would feel comforted when he went in front of the microphone. Instead, he goes in front of the microphone and, oh God, what's he going to say this time? Like, can you show some passion? Can you show that you understand what we're going through? Can you answer a question straight? All those sorts of things. And he doesn't. And so I think he's rubbed some of the fan base the wrong way because of that. But I think that's one of the things that sort of translates into recruiting. So when you say, how do I fix it? Well, one, you spend money. Two, I think you make sure that the front office staff that faces these players has everything that they need. And then the third thing is I think when you bring in a new defensive coordinator, and that's going to happen, I can't imagine they bring Grantham back. When you bring in a new defensive coordinator, that guy has to be the face of the recruiting, right? He's got to be the guy who's going out there and making sure that he's glad handing high school coaches, that he's making sure the recruits feel comfortable, and that he's sort of, explaining what it's like to be recruited by Dan Mullen and why Mullen is the way he is. And I think people can get it after that. I think, one of the things is when you're a savant, I think sometimes you're misunderstood. Mullen, for the most part, is a very, very good offensive coach. But obviously there are some deficits when it comes to bringing in high level talent. And, there's some things that they need to fix there.
Well, and you saw the percentages that Kirby laid out. So 25% of it's coaching in Kirby's Smarts Mind, 25% evaluation, 50% recruiting, 25% coaching. There's no doubt that Dan Mullen does the coaching on the offensive side very highly. But let's move into a dollar here because we'll get into Mullen here. And we'll talk about your article today, Will. I'll let you take it. I'll let you lead off on this one here. But Mullen, is he holding on by a rope or hanging on by a thread? What do you mean by that comment, Will?
Well, he talked about after the game, guys holding onto the rope, not letting go of the rope. When the rope starts pulling, you get your hand burned and those sorts of things. And all of that is true, but his inability to vocalize that he knows changes are necessary and then to follow through and make those changes in a way that's meaningful is something that I think makes Florida fans doubt whether he's the right guy for the job. That more people in the last 2 weeks ask me and even tell me that they don't think Mullen's the right guy for the job. And there is a certain aspect of, if now he's not the right guy, try again with the next guy, because you'd rather do that than spend another couple of years in mediocrity and then go get a guy who's out there. Now we can have an argument about that at a different time. In fact, I think we will in the bonus episode, but the point is that there is a PR component to this. And the PR component is if you can't sell your own fan base that you know what you're doing, how can your fan base then feel comfortable that you're going to be able to sell recruits? And how can your fan base be convinced that you're going to be able to sell your players to get them to buy in the locker room? And so you're talking about holding onto the rope, but part of holding onto the rope is us believing that you're going to be able to hold onto the rope and not believing that you're sitting there with your fingers sort of just barely holding on. And that's sort of where he is, right? Because holding onto the rope means that you give guys, that you play the guys who give the team the best chance to win. It means that you give those players the full starters reps in practice. It means that you recruit or develop a kicker who can make a field goal so that you don't have to go for it on 4th and 13. It means taking shots after you get turnovers. They had a 4th and 5 from Georgia's 6-yard line when they were down by 24 and didn't go for it. And after being aggressive early in the game, to not then be aggressive there when you at least had an opportunity to in terms of meaningfully change Florida's ability to potentially win that game, kicking a field goal there meant nothing. And so missing it meant nothing really, even though it was like a 26-yarder, but a touchdown there makes a difference. And so, Florida fans need to be convinced at this point. Like, they've watched the last few years, they've seen 10-3, they've seen 11-2, and they know that's a ceiling. They're seeing this now and they're saying, okay, well, this is tough to watch. They need to be recruited in some respects to make sure that they understand that Dan Mullen's the right guy for the job. And, he may feel like he doesn't need to do that, but at the end of the day, the people who are reaching out to me 4, 5, 6 weeks ago to say, I don't think Mullen's the right guy for the job are people who are buying, $100, $200 tickets. People who are starting to make some noise now are people who spend an awful lot of money on the program and have some influence within the program. And when you start losing those people, I think you're going to have some problems. And so there's some work that needs to be done. The good news is that the schedule is going to get lighter. And so there's some time to do that work. I think there's some time to lick the wounds. And I do think we need to realize that Alabama and Georgia are two of the better teams in the country. And so losses to those two teams, I don't think is anything to really be that worried about in a year that we expected to be down. But the loss to Kentucky, especially the way it happened with the special teams gaffes, and then the loss to LSU, where a defense that just couldn't get off the field and couldn't stop a simple play, those are things that just can't happen. And those are the things that make the fan base start to doubt that you can get the job done. And that's sort of where Mullen's at, right? I think Georgia may be an awesome team, but Florida is the 7th ranked team in the 24/7 talent composite. They're not the 24th ranked team. They're not the 35th ranked team. They're the 7th ranked team. What are they getting from their 5-star guys? Justin Shorter, Brenton Cox, DeMarcus Bowman, Lorenzo Lingard, Gravon Dexter, Jason Marshall. Like, some of those guys have played, but none of them are guys that I'm go that guy's going to be on the all SEC team this year. But if you look at Georgia, Nolan Smith, Zamir White, Jalen Carter, N'Kobe Dean, Travon Walker, Darnell Washington, those are all 5-stars. And then they hit on a walk-on with Stetson Bennett, who's playing pretty well, and then a 3-star in Jordan Davis, a defensive tackle. And now the team is just sitting there unstoppable because those guys have hit. And, if you're going to hang your hat on development, you really have to develop. And that's the thing, is that when I look at Georgia's development, when I look at Florida's development for 2021, what's the difference? The difference is Georgia had better players to start with, and they've kind of developed them equivalently, and Georgia just beat us by 27 points.
It's not the loss to Georgia. It's the non-competitive nature of the loss to Georgia that really gets under my skin, in particular with this team here. I felt like, at least offensively, we should have shown a little more in that game. I felt like that going in. But, hey, this season, the most significant thing that's going to come from this season down the road are the seeds that are planted going forward that have happened. We've done some hard work throughout the season to figure out that, hey, Richardson's probably the guy over Emory, that it's taken some time to get there. So the seeds that are planting that will grow into the next couple seasons are the most important things going down these next 4 games. But Georgia, the Georgia loss, this wasn't the one that really set us off the rails. I think it's been this way mentally since the Kentucky loss, which was our second SEC loss, and really put the Georgia game into, Georgia wasn't going to lose 2. You thought maybe they'll lose 1, but they're probably not going to lose 2 on the season. So it's really been kind of a mess this whole month since that Kentucky loss. I think if you don't come out of this season in the next 4 games here without a serious commitment to developing Anthony Richardson, getting young guys playing time. You mentioned Bowman and Lingard, Wingo, Watson, Collier. You want to see some of these guys get some serious playing time. It's time to go with Todd Grantham. I get it. His numbers are improved. Things are better this year overall. Fine. Offense has cost us in some issues, some games this year. Defense has. It's time to make the decision on that. Number 3, pinpoint the issue in recruiting. We were talking about that earlier. Is it bigger than Mullen? Bama and Georgia, do they have these broad networks that Florida just doesn't have? Are we blaming Dan Mullen for something that's a systematic issue that needs to be fixed within the UAA and the boosters and some other entities that can help out, especially in this new NIL era? What do we need to do there? Why are Bama and Georgia landing players over and over again that we have our heart set on, and it's just so disproportionately in their favor right now? What is going on? What is going on with that? Figure that out. But these are simple prescriptions to bigger problems, Will. And the really 2 big problems, which I love that you zeroed in on this. I mentioned this last week on Stand Up and Holler, and you zeroed in with the onside kick attempt in this game, with just how badly it was executed. And really, it's a signal of a lack of attention to detail in some areas of the program. Dan Mullen is an elite offensive mind. I don't think any Gator fan is going to question that. Sure, yesterday was a bad game. There's some bad games every now and then, but all in all, from what we've seen from him, he's put an exciting product on the field offensively. You can't really debate that. But how's the defense been? It's been up and down. The special teams are a total disaster this year. And it seems like the attention to detail across the board may lack a little bit. You got to have – and the number two thing, Will, so you got to fix that attention to detail. And the number two thing is just the willingness to make difficult decisions in a timely manner. Not that you eventually get rid of Todd Grantham, but we didn't do it when we should have. And I'm going to give this example. We'll go back. I mentioned the comparison I had with the Penn State example before, and I mentioned Ohio State in there. I want to mention Ohio State again here. The Buckeyes, they gave up 500 yards of offense against Oregon and Tulsa in the second and third games of the season. They gave up over 400 in a sloppy performance in the opener against Minnesota. And Ohio State head coach Ryan Day, he revoked defensive coordinator Kerry Combs' play calling duties. Kerry Combs is not some nobody they hired off the street, okay? He was hired back to Ohio State in January of 2020 after a successful stint coaching defensive backs for Mike Vrabel and the Titans. The Titans, they went to the AFC title game, by the way, so he did real well in the NFL. But before that, he spent most of the last decade coaching DBs and special teams under Urban Meyer at Ohio State. So this isn't an outsider who doesn't understand how the program's supposed to run, or he's not meeting Day's expectations across the board. He knows how to recruit. He knows the system. He knows exactly what Day wants. His first tenure at the Buckeyes, too, just to illustrate how good this guy Combs did as the DB coach, 5 first-round draft choices that he developed between 2014 and 2018. Every starting Ohio State cornerback in Combs' 6-year tenure reached the NFL as an assistant coach. So he was well-respected when he was hired in January 2020. He understood the expectations, and still, Ryan Day made a difficult choice heading into Game 4 of this season. So after one season, which was the half season last year, plus 3 games of this season, Ryan Day went out in the media in September. He said, we took a hard look at it and had a lot of hard conversation and tried to figure out what gives us the best chance to move forward. This is kind of the rhythm and the structure that we feel is right for now, and it's best suited for our defense. And he took the play calling duties away from Combs. Combs went up in the booth. They gave it to somebody else on the staff, and it's been going much better since then. So Combs, well-respected guy. Day made the move anyway. We bring that to us. Let's bring that to our situation here at Florida. Todd Grantham, let's be real. The time to let him go, if you did it in a timely manner, would have been when, Will. After the SEC title game last season, that would have been the ultimate, time to go. Time to go after that performance. But instead, he's had to suffer through a lame duck season, and despite an improvement on the defensive side of the ball overall, he's not likely going to be at Gainesville in 2022. He may be, but let's hope not. But it's not good for him. It's not good for the fans. It's not good for recruiting. We've seen guys drop like flies the last couple of weeks, especially on the defensive side. And ultimately, it's not good for Mullen in the program. So why drag it out? What is holding Mullen back from making that decision? Mullen talked about the Gator standard. We quoted a lot on this show. Mullen needs to demand a championship level of quality in all phases of the program, not just in the quarterback room, not just on the offensive side of the ball. Special teams has been a liability this season. Extra point against Alabama cost us the game. Blocked field goal return for a touchdown against Kentucky. Missed field goals plus an atrocious onside kick attempt against UGA. The defense does not come up in big stretches for us. So we are not a championship program across the board. Parts of it can be at times, but across the board, we've yet to put it together under Dan Mullen, Will.
Well, I enjoyed your rant. I enjoyed every minute of it. I think what you're asking for is accountability, right? And I think we saw it last year. Marco Wilson throws the shoe against LSU, stays on the field. And everybody was upset at Wilson for having thrown the shoe, but they should have been upset at Mullen and at Grantham for leaving Wilson on the field. because at the end of the day, you have to have accountability. Your players have to know they have accountability. Your coaches have to know they have accountability. And Mullen's feeling some accountability from fans and from boosters and potentially from the administration. The question is he going to feel the full wrath of that accountability before he finally makes his staff and his players feel accountability as well? I think on the bright side, if you look at it, I think historically Mullen's time has probably passed, right? That most SEC champion coaches get that done in their second or third year. Dating back to 1990, only 2 coaches have won the SEC championship at a school after their third season. I think 2019 for Orgeron was technically his third season because he was an interim in 2016. But if you look back then, Phil Fulmer in 1997 with Peyton Manning at quarterback, and then Tommy Tuberville at Auburn in 2004, each in their 5th seasons won the SEC. Fulmer had a pretty good career there at Tennessee, right? I mean, but if you think about what Fulmer was, he was the sidekick to Spurrier kicking him all the time, right? And every once in a while, Tennessee was able to sort of find its way up and beat Florida and make it to the SEC and even win the SEC championship, wins the national championship in 1998. At the same time, I think over that time span, you would say that Tennessee was second fiddle to Florida, right? I think that's undoubtable. And so when you look at Tuberville, he was out at Auburn pretty soon after that SEC championship in 2004. Really not a guy you think of as like having made his mark in Auburn. So yes, those guys won in their 5th seasons, but at the same time, that's kind of what you're looking at. So I think that's kind of the ceiling, right? The ceiling is probably Phil Fulmer in relation to Florida and Steve Spurrier. And that's sort of Dan Mullen in relation to Kirby Smart in Georgia. That's what you're getting. There's risk to making change. There's risk to not making change. And that's something that people who make a lot more money than we do are going to have to weigh, because Phil Fulmer's a really good coach. He's Hall of Fame level coach at Tennessee, right? Like, so the fact that he went 11-2 every year with Peyton Manning, or I guess 10-2 back when they only played 12 games and went to the Citrus Bowl, but went 10-2 with Peyton Manning, an awful lot at Tennessee, and then was able to get over the hump when Florida had a down year once Danny Werfel left, and they had a little opportunity there, right? That opportunity kind of presented itself last year. Maybe that opportunity presents itself again this year. I mean, JT Daniels hasn't been able to wrestle the job away from Stetson Bennett. What does that mean for the guys behind Stetson Bennett? Carson Beck hasn't been somebody that anybody seems to have been all that impressed with. Vandergraff, nobody knows whether he's going to be good. One of the things that you see is that with Clemson, even this year, right? Clemson has Yui Agalele, a quarterback, replacing Trevor Lawrence, and all of a sudden the offense looks terrible. So even with a bunch of talent around guys, you still have to hit at quarterback. And that gives me hope that next year things are going to be better. But I think you're absolutely right that accountability is key. That accountability starts with the defensive coordinator, but then it goes down to the defensive staff. It goes down to the offensive staff, right? I mean, the offensive line wasn't all that great yesterday either. And the wide receivers weren't getting open. And, so there's a lot of blame to go around. And it's more a question. I do wonder, like, if you think about organizations, there's a need for change. Like if you have guys who have been in the same organization for a really long time, they helped build the organization from what it was to what it is, and they've seen it grow. And the way I've done it works. And so why don't I just keep doing that? And hopefully what this is, and this season is an opportunity for Mullen to say, well, maybe I need to go bring in some new people and some new blood. And that new blood will be able to tell me how it worked where they were. And we'll take the good things from where they were, and we'll take the good things that I've built over these years, and we'll meld those things together into something that can be more than each of them as individually. And that's the hope. I don't think Florida's going to struggle to score points for too long. I think the quarterback situation is going to get figured out pretty quickly. The question is going to be, is there enough talent, and is there enough discipline and accountability on the defensive side to get that side of the ball up to where even when the offense struggles every once in a while, the defense is going to be able to win every game. Because again, if you go back to 2006, it's not as though the Florida offense piloted by Dan Mullen won that game against South Carolina. I mean, that 17-16 win against South Carolina was because special teams were awesome, and it was because the defense was just a bear for anybody to play against that year. Gave the offense enough time to sort of find its legs. And then in 2008, the offense was the one that carried it. The defense was pretty good that year, but the offense was really the explosive thing that carried them. And in order to get those things to hit at the same time, you're going to need accountability. And I think that's sort of what you're asking for.
Florida as a whole, to the outside fan that doesn't know a lot about the Gators program, is an offense. It has an offensive identity, but there's been plenty of great defenses and defensive players, longtime NFL players that have come through this program, and the defense just hasn't been there. It hasn't. You talk about that South Carolina game in 2006. Hey, whenever Mullen has needed a stop from his defense in the last 2 years, does he get it? Nope. That's all you need to know. I use that point over and over again. It's really simple and shallow to say, but you don't have to go farther than that to look at a reason why this marriage isn't working with Grantham. And Grantham's going to get another job. I'm not trying to disrespect him as a coach. I'm not trying to disrespect any of these other guys. I just think it's not, for whatever reason, either Mullen's not paying enough attention to certain areas of the team, and he's too focused on the offense. Maybe you got to look at it and say, hey, is it time to get an OC so you can take more of that CEO role? A lot of times it's like use a corporate example. Is the best sales guy going to be the best manager or CEO for everybody? And if Mullen could be excellent at one thing and not excellent at three others, we're seeing a lot of those holes pop up right now. And that's what I think that's where we really got to take the hard look in the mirror and really make some serious moves this offseason in particular to really maximize the value out of 2021. You treat it as a hard learning experience. Everyone gets a dose of humility once in a while, but I just want to also say this. In this moment while we're down, Dan Mullen is 100% capable of leading this program to a one-off national title. You saw it with Ed Orgeron at LSU, Gene Chizik. You mentioned Phil Fulmer only won one at Tennessee. Tommy Tuberville got ripped off, should have been in the national title game of that 12-0 Auburn team. No doubt in my mind that we could catch Georgia on a down year, upset Bama in Atlanta, and some of this year, a lot of things are going against us, but the ball starts bouncing your way again, get a couple of lucky wins here or there, and all of a sudden, boom, national title. Will Mullen ever build a program that's competing year in and year out for titles the way they're doing right now up in Athens for SEC titles anyway? You can make all the national championship jokes you want about 1980, but they are competing year in, year out for SEC titles up there. And Bama's competing year in and year out. Right now, the only Mullen's capable under Mullen, we're in Auburn or in LSU, a school that's going to pop up once every few years and have a shot. And we better convert because we're not going to be back for a few more years. So that's what it is with Mullen. But do I think we got that high-end potential still with Mullen? Yeah. And we didn't have that with the other two guys before him. And so that's where I think it's clear to say that Mullen definitely has a level of talent that hasn't existed here in a while. And he's still a very good coach in a lot of respects. But this is an opportunity for Mullen to grow too. This is an opportunity for him to grow and really develop program. At Mississippi State, some of this stuff could have slipped under the radar because you're supposed to go 8-4 at Mississippi State or 7-5. And you'd be like, yeah, we're Mississippi State. If we had the talent, we do more. Well, now you know that's not true. Now you know that those problems at Mississippi State are still problems at Florida. And when you can't drag your feet on swapping a quarterback, you can't drag your feet on firing. Like, you have to be on top of this stuff here. You have to be on top of it if you want to stay on top of the heap, competing with unfortunately, we got to play Georgia and Alabama every single year if we want to win the SEC title. And we talk about national championships a lot at this program. Let's win a freaking SEC title again, Will. It's been since 2008.
I got to say, I'm enjoying hearing you parroting back everything I said during the offseason to me. It's great. I'm enjoying every minute of it. You sound an awful lot like Will circa like April and May of 2021. Look, it's not a surprise, right? Like, at the end of the day, the question is, are we Clemson or are we Michigan? And, Michigan had a down year last year. Michigan has having an up year this year. Obviously lost to Michigan State yesterday. And so, Michigan again is going to sort of be on the outside looking in because they weren't able to get the job done, but they were close. And so, Michigan, Harbaugh's going to get another chance next year, and he's going to have another 5-0, 6-0 start. And then he's going to lose to Ohio State at the end of the year because Day's a better coach and has much better talent. And everybody's going to go, huh? And one of these days, Ryan Day's going to have a quarterback who struggles, and they'll turn the ball over a few times against Michigan, and Harbaugh's going to find his way in there. Clemson, on the other hand, was able to find an elite quarterback for 3 straight cycles, right? They had Taj Boyd, then Deshaun Watson, and then Trevor Lawrence. I don't think people appreciate how good Taj Boyd was because he sort of carried those teams. It really didn't have the talent level that the teams that Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence had. But those guys are, Deshaun Watson, if he wasn't in trouble for other things outside of football in the NFL, would be one of the hottest commodities out there on the market for trades. And Trevor Lawrence was just the number 1 draft pick. Their number 1 overall pick in the draft. And Florida's going to have that guy, right? That is the reality. You need Cam Newton when you're Auburn to win national championships. You need Marcus Mariota when you're Oregon to compete at that high of a level. And you need Joe Burrow when you're LSU to be able to take down Alabama and take down Georgia, which is what they did that year. If you don't have those guys, you're going to struggle. And so that, to me, is the focus from here on out, is making sure you do everything you can to find your Joe Burrow, to find your Cam Newton, to find your Mac Jones, right?
We might have him. We might have him on the roster.
Well, got to find out. So that's what we're going to do from here on out. And like I said, I'm enjoying seeing Nick Knudsen embrace the Will Miles philosophy from earlier this year. It's enjoyable.
I will say I've been one where I do look. I remember a lot of those recruiting cycles in the later Urban Meyer years where we were still putting up fantastic recruiting cycles, but the players weren't panning out. So there's some. I do have a level of skepticism toward, just because you're ranked a certain thing in recruiting. I do have a level of skepticism toward it. But when you're just doing it, that's why it's important where you hit on so many 4 or 5 star players, so you can afford to miss on those. I do understand that part too, but I got really fired up. I kept remembering the conversation in those later 2000s type of recruiting. Well, who's our next Percy Harvin? And I think we asked ourselves that legitimately for 5 years before realizing, oh, there's no such thing as another Percy Harvin. That guy was just a one of a kind type of player.
And it's interesting, right? Is that people. So Florida, I think Florida fans, and I think Florida, the program, were extraordinarily lucky that, one, Steve Spurrier turned out to be as good as he was, and he was an elite coach. And I think people who sell him short on recruiting are actually doing him a disservice. I think he was an excellent recruiter. And then, obviously sort of antagonized everybody. But he was also the favored son. And I think he lasted longer than most guys do in this crucible for 2 reasons. One is that Florida was down sort of when he took over. And 2, he led us to heights that we'd never been before. And so probably got a pass on some of the learning curve early on. That Fiesta Bowl, can you imagine the noise around the program if Mullen went out and just got waxed by Tommy Frazier in Nebraska in that Fiesta Bowl? And I think the noise was a lot less because everybody saw what Spurrier was building. So that's the first thing, is we got very lucky to have somebody for 11 years. Right? He was there till 2001. Excellent run that really was unprecedented in Florida history. And then he hit again on Urban Meyer. And you've had 2, if you think about the history of college football for the last 40 years, those guys are 2 of the best to ever do it. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like, the Florida program gave them the ability to be better than they were. No, I think they were just 2 of the best guys to ever do it over the last 40 years. And I don't think we're ever going to put Dan Mullen in the best to ever do it over the last 40 or 50 years when all's said and done. I'm not going to take my kid and bounce him on my knee or my grandkids and bounce them on my knee and talk about the Dan Mullen era. Might talk about the Urban Meyer era that way. Might talk about the Steve Spurrier era that way. I don't know. I'm going to talk about the Dan Mullen era that way. Whereas I think Alabama fans will bounce their kids on their knee and talk about the Nick Saban era, and they'll probably be doing it while Alabama's 4-4 one season because they've got some guy out there who can't get the job done consistently the same way Saban used to. And, things move in cycles, right? I mean, Gene Stallings was a really good coach for Alabama. I don't know that he was good enough because of Bear Bryant. They finally bring in Saban. Saban turns out to be a monster. And now you're seeing that. But there's going to come a day when he's not there anymore, and they're going to go through the same wilderness that we've sort of gone through with McElwain and Mullen or with McElwain and Muschamp and now Mullen. And, Mullen is a good coach, and Mullen has done very good things for the program. He has not led the program to where it needs to be yet, and where he said he would lead them and where the program expects to be. But I do think that we need to look back. It's the same thing with basketball, right? Like you look at Billy Donovan, you say, how fortunate is the program to have a guy like Billy Donovan come build the program, and then stay long enough to see it all the way through those championships. And it's been hard for anybody to reproduce that. And now you look at a guy like Mike White, who makes the tournament every year, but that's not good enough for this program, for a large segment of the fan base. And so, there are people who don't like White and want him out. Sort of the same general situation. It's almost identical, really, when you look at it. Is you had a transcendent guy earlier set the standard, and then you have somebody come in who understands that's the standard, but isn't quite able to live up to it. And the question is exactly what you said earlier: is Mullen going to be able to be that one-off and get that championship? And then if you can get that championship, can that snowball into more because you're able to sort of establish things like that? Look, I still have faith. I mean, one of the reasons I wrote the article I did last week about giving Mullen next year is because, like you said, Anthony Richardson has the ability to potentially be that special quarterback. You bring in a new defensive coordinator. They are not the least talented guy on the block. And so, LSU in 2019 wasn't the most talented team in the country. They had the best quarterback. And, Alabama last year was the most talented team in the country and had the best quarterback, which meant they were unstoppable. Georgia this year is one of the most talented teams in the country, but does not have the best quarterback, which is one of the reasons why I still think they're susceptible to either Tennessee or Alabama or somebody in the playoff coming down the road. And Florida's going to be in that same case too, right? Florida's going to be in a case where if they get special play out of Anthony Richardson, but the defense is sort of spotty, then everybody's going to sort of doubt him until they finally get the job done. And we'll see whether Mullen can do that. So I think there's still time. The jury's still out. I'm not sitting here saying it's time to get rid of him, but I will say I've had more people ask me, who would you replace him with in the past 2 days than I have over the entire era. And the reality is that people are getting antsy and you're getting antsy too, right? You're asking for real concrete change. I think people want to see real concrete change and real recognition that close isn't good enough anymore. That one score losses don't matter. No more moral victories. The SEC is not a moral victory league. And, we're either going to find that out or we're going to find a new coach. And that's sort of the way this program rolls.
I'd say the first 3 years of the Dan Mullen era, his honeymoon officially ended that foggy night against LSU. And since then, it's been a real struggle. So it's just Gator Nation's been in a salty mood since then. And we're getting a lot of that same type of frustration this year. So that's carried into this season. I'm not asking for Dan Mullen to be the guy who's removed. I'm asking for change from Dan Mullen, if he can change, if he's capable of that. Most guys, what was so unbelievable about what LSU and Ed Orgeron did a few years ago, Will, how many coaches just completely changed their identity like that, like Coach O did? That doesn't really happen much. And that's what I think with Mullen, you want to see him keep the identity on offense. The offense doesn't need a lot of tinkering and work. You want to see some better players get in there, and maybe you can have some arguments about offensive line recruiting, some development there. You can talk about some getting into the weeds with some of that stuff. But in general, the offense has not been the huge issue holding this program back the last couple of years. So it's a defensive side of the football. It's the special teams been a little sloppy, different phases of the game. The offensive, you could point to the turnovers and the losses have not done us any favors either. But hey, you look at this team going forward into 2022, Will, we still got plenty of tough games. This is the SEC. You got Texas and Oklahoma coming in down the road. I know we're a few years away from that, but it's only going to get more difficult to win this conference. Looking ahead to next year, though, Will, I'm immediately looking – early on, you got a trip to Neyland Stadium, and then you got LSU at home, you got Missouri at home, and then back-to-back weeks, Georgia and at Texas A&M next year. But overall, the schedule's a lot more favorable than it's been so far in 2021.
Yeah, well, it helps when you don't play the number one team in the country twice. So we'll see. I think, you mentioned all the changes you'd like to see. I don't want to see change for the sake of change. I want to see change that improves the process.
Yes.
And so I think we can all look back at the last 4 years on the defensive side of the ball and say that just because the defense has played well in 3 games this year does not mean that the process overall is adequate. And I think we can look at the way the quarterbacks have been chosen and developed and that sort of stuff over the last 4 or 5 years and say, or 3 or 4 years, and say, some things might have been improved there. You hear the Anthony Richardson starting over Emory Jones debate is colored by the Kyle Trask starting over Felipe Franks debate. Right. And so, I think you don't need to make a tectonic shift like Orgeron did. I mean, Orgeron said, hey, we're going to completely hand over the reins for the offensive side of the ball. I do think maybe you need to do that on the defense and just say, hey, we're going to hand over the reins on the defensive side of the ball and not meddle and worry about the offense. And the only thing I need to worry about as the head coach is whether you have the resources you need to do what you need to do. But we'll see, right? I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, nothing has changed after this loss that wasn't there after the LSU loss and wasn't there after the Kentucky loss. And so all this does is confirm what we've suspected, which is that, there was always the hope that Florida was going to be able to put everything together and have a complete game against Georgia. And instead what they did was they showed us exactly what they've shown us all year, which is that they're inconsistent and that they lack the discipline and accountability in order to pull off the kind of upset that you need in order to have those qualities to pull off the kind of upset that a team like Georgia puts in front of you. And so, until those things change, you're going to keep getting 34-7.
I was thinking about the Tobias Funke line from Arrested Development when you're sitting there saying, well, what if we put it together a full game against Georgia, even though we haven't done it all year? Where it's like, that doesn't work for anybody, but maybe it'll work for us. Like that was basically our thinking going into the Georgia game last week.
That's been our thinking all along with recruiting, man. I mean, it's the theme of the era, right? The theme of the era is we've got a floor, and the floor is pretty attractive, but the ceiling is what's in doubt. Yeah. And historically, the recruiting that Florida's putting together does not serve for the ceiling that Florida fans want. And so we're hitting that ceiling now. And, it's frustrating to hit that ceiling, but we've seen that ceiling for the last 4 years and have been looking at it saying, look, recruiting's not getting any better. And until it gets better, we're going to have a ceiling on there and we probably ought to get used to it. And so, that's just sort of what we're running into now. And it's depressing, but it is what it is. And like you said, we'll see whether Florida and Mullen are able to overcome that ceiling. Maybe they can. I mean, maybe he really does have the skill to be able to do that. And he's going to be able to stick it to all of us who've been saying that he can't get it done. But obviously today it looks a lot more prescient to have looked at those statistics and said, hey, this is going to be a rough road to hoe. I've always said all along that if he can do it, I'm going to congratulate him because he's done something that pretty much no other coach has been able to do is especially with two recruiting behemoths in the SEC. But, until that moment comes, I think it's going to be a lot of people in the program or a lot of people who love the program who look at it and say, can we build it the way other people have built it? Like, that'd be great. Like, we know that works instead of trying to build it a different way. But, it is what it is. And, we still have more games this year. That's the thing. I keep looking back. I'm disappointed in the losses this year. I'm disappointed in the way the season's gone, but we only get 13 of these every year. And one of the things I'm really trying to focus on now is that, my kids are starting to get into football more than they have in the past, especially my 9-year-old is starting to get into it. And so these games, like the LSU game, is really entertaining, even though Florida lost. If Florida would have pulled it out, it would have been way more entertaining, but he really enjoyed watching that with me. And so, embrace the fact that the reason we love the sport, the reason we love our program is because of the relationships and the tailgating and the people we get to hang out with and the way it brings people together. And that doesn't have to change because you're 4-4. It doesn't have to change because you had a down year. And so don't let it ruin that. Enjoy those experiences, enjoy the familial part of it, enjoy the fact that we're all Gators and that still means something. And Georgia can win a national championship. It doesn't matter. That degree still sucks. And so, let's just enjoy that. You
can take like the Northwestern approach to this now. At least we'll be
no. Look, the trophy case at Florida is still more full than Georgia. But let's be honest, we're their bosses.
All right, Will. Good. There's a lot to talk about today. Longer episode than normal for Stand Up and Holler, I believe, but we had a lot to talk about. A lot of questions about the program going forward, but hopefully there are brighter days ahead here. We got 4 games left this season, like you mentioned, all very winnable games. Let's finish strong. We certainly know that momentum can be created or lost at the end of the season, heading into the next season. So I will never again believe that the end of a season is not connected to the next, even though that is true. It's not. I'll start believing that going forward. So let's finish strong, create some momentum for 2022 in the last third of the season. And like you said, we only get so many of these Saturdays a year. we're talking about going to the Florida State game, right? Like, I mean, there's plenty to look ahead to for this Florida football team going forward. And, let's just hope to God that Georgia stumbles and blows it like they always do. That's all I can really end up.
Yeah, man. So I wholeheartedly agree. Thank you to everybody for listening to us. Certainly, we're going to keep bringing this content throughout the year. We're going to have a bonus episode talking about what now coming up after this. So if you're interested, go over to patreon.com/read and reaction and sign up. It's like $2 for a month to get these bonus episodes we put out there. I write a weekly newsletter as well. So we appreciate everybody supporting us, and we're not going anywhere. It's in all kinds of weather, regardless of the success or failure of the program. And we could certainly be critical, but this is sort of like Animal House, right? They can't do that to our pledges. Only we could do that to our pledges. And that's the way Florida is. We're one big happy family. And sometimes families have fights and sometimes families go through rough patches, but at the end of the day, we're all family, and we love the university, love the school, and love the program.
I love the all kinds of weather notion, but why doesn't anybody say that whenever we win? It's only when you lose you hear that. It's like when someone says you win some, you lose some. You never hear it when you win some. So in all kinds of weather, I'd like to hear that when I win one time so I can start having more positive associations with all kinds of weather. So I'm just going to throw that out there. So I get all kinds of weather to death whenever we lose. I never hear it when we win. Let's start hearing it when we win. Come on, guys.
Man, you're one ornery dude tonight. I enjoyed it.
I had a lot to think about yesterday. Watched a lot of bad football yesterday. But all right, man. Good episode. We're heading out. Let's beat Carolina this week and get back on track. Go Gators.
Absolutely. Go Gators.
Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week. And check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knutson, joined by Will Miles. And as always, go Gators.